Hello everyone, it's Ashwin Rao, and in today's video I am bringing you my Engineer Boot Roundup. This is a pair of 6 Engineer boots that I have acquired. A couple of these are going to be finding new homes soon, so I wanted to do this video before I sent them along. But I wanted to take you on my journey through Engineer boots because it is a style of boot that I long resisted that has to do with an early pair of Engineers that I got about 4 to 5 years ago, which was a pair of Mr. Lou's from Wesco, a boot company out of the Pacific Northwest that many of you are familiar with. The Mr. Lou is one of their well-regarded, established styles of Engineer, and it was considered one of the standard bearers at the time for Engineer boots being made and popularized amongst the heritage boot community. But I came across a Mr. Lou, tried it on. It was in a very thick waxed flesh leather, so I'm not sure if you would have different experiences with different leathers, but that leather and the shape of that boot, the shaft and the ingress and egress from the boot, trying to get my foot in was nearly impossible. I was sweating, I was taking off the buckles, I was trying to loosen things up, and I could not do it. So at the end of the day, I parted with the Mr. Lou's and moved on from Engineers in general. In recent months and years, I have a few friends who have talked a lot more about Engineer boots, including David Shelvedge on Instagram as well as YouTube. Took a deep dive into Engineers, starting with Clinch, which is that model right there, as well as Brian the Bootmaker, this model right over here. And bottom line is he came away rather impressed, and it became clear to me that suitable Engineer boots are all about fit. If any of these boots do not fit, the juice ain't worth the squeeze is the bottom line. This particular model right here, as I pointed out, is from Bristle Black Bootmaker out of Indonesia. Bristle Black used to be known as Benzene, has become known for its laceless models largely. They do a wide range of models, but they're known amongst enthusiasts for their Engineer design. So this is the Bristle Black on their Kapak Last, which is their heritage last, very similar to the Clinch CN Narrow Last. They recently released this Batu Last, which was the boot that actually sparked my more recent interest in Engineers, along with some of the opinions of some of my boot making friends. This model here, just so you know, is from Crush On Retro. I just recently acquired this boot. This is the budget champion in my opinion. And actually, of all of these boots, this one seems to have the best fit for me. So just keep that in mind. And then to the right, these 3 boots right here are essentially the 3 kings, I guess, or queens, depending on how you look at it, of Engineer boots. They are the 3 standard bearers for Engineer boots amongst many enthusiasts, though I would argue that there's another that we'll talk about later on. This being from John Lofgren, their Wabash or Wabash Engineer, built in Japan, run by a gentleman, John Lofgren, based out of the US. This is the Roll Club Engineer on the 1940 Last, done by Brian the Bootmaker, highly regarded in the community. And finally, the standard bearer for all things Engineer, from Brass Tokyo, the Clinch Engineer boot, this one on the CN Wide Last, which is a little bit more of an accommodating last. So that is the lineup of boots that I have, but let me step back and start to talk a little bit more about each boot. So this guy right here, as I mentioned, is the Bristle Black on their Kapak Last. This is built on a Indonesian rough-out leather that has been waxed over, so it's a waxed rough-out leather. This is a hand-welted boot. Indonesian boots largely are hand-welted, partly due to cost. It's hard to own a Goodyear welting machine, but their skill in hand welting, hand lasting, is become really incredible, and Bristle Black really is known as the boot maker for laceless boots around the heritage bootwear community, certainly at the budget or budget-friendly end. So this boot was my first foray into Engineers, and that boot is the one that convinced me that Engineers were going to be for me because it was finally easy for me to get my feet in and out of this boot. Part of it was that the handle of this leather is a little bit more flexible. I was able to get in without that much of a difficulty. And after wearing these for a few minutes, the whole shaft of the boot seemed to disappear. I really liked the Kapak Last, which is reminiscent of the CN Narrow Last from Clinch with more of a taper. And I remember the words of Dave from the Vintage Future YouTube channel, who mentioned that Bristle Black was amongst his value champs, if not his favorite designs of engineer boots, as he went through his own journey. And he had owned Clinch and other brands as well, Brian the Bootmaker. And he came away feeling that Bristle Black boots offer incredible value. Now, he had a different leather than I had, but still the idea being same last, similar fit. So this is the boot that convinced me that I was going to try engineers. Now, Bristle Black recently introduced a new last. This is the Batu Last, which you can see has a bit of a sprung toe here. A little bit this toe spring, as well as a bump on the toe. This is built on a black wax flesh with a full rubber cork sole, and has no midsole on it, so it's a little less bulky. The Kapak Last, I actually think, is maybe a little bit smaller volume, but they're both relatively lower volume lasts. And the Batu Last seems to have a slightly more casual flair. The tip of the shoe has a little bit more roundedness to it. The bump, I think, also lends itself to a little bit more casual flair. And this particular style, as I mentioned, can come with either a structured or unstructured toe. Jeff, the denim dentist, recently picked up one of these in a horsehide leather, a black horsehide leather without a structured toe, and that toe has since collapsed, and he's really liking that pair. Speaking of some of my fellow enthusiasts in the footwear community, if you really want to take a deeper dive into engineers, you should be listening to a few different channels. The number one I think you should check out is Almost Vintage Style. That's Jake Rodriguez's channel. Jake is an esteemed member of the boot community. He's been known for many years now as an enthusiast and supporter of all types of engineer boots. He has a number of them. He has a deep knowledge of engineer boots that I simply don't have, and that's based off of trying them, understanding the design choices, and really taking apart boots and understanding how they fit. One thing that I was interested in when I talked and listened to Jake recently on one of his videos was that many of his engineers, he admitted to, had a fair bit of heel slip. This was another issue that I had in general with engineers, is that because there is just so much room here with the shaft and the footbed here, that roominess can sometimes lend itself to a sloppy heel fit, meaning that your heel can slip up and down in the back of the shoe. And I found out that that was an issue for him too, and he just assumed that that was sort of part of the engineer experience. Others have mentioned that too. And that's another, for me, turnoff. I want a shoe to fit really, really well. Well, it turns out that this pair of Crush-On Retros, which we'll talk about in a little bit, even though it looks super bulky, this particular heel counter and design of this back heel stay really allowed me to have my foot secured in this. So this pair really blew me away, and you can watch my video on that. But that is the budget champ amongst this entire lineup of boots. And Crush-On Retro really offers high quality welted footwear. So bottom line is, my first journey started with these guys here, the Bristle Black and Bristle Black, Kapak and Batu Last engineers. This one in a waxed rough out from Indonesia, and this one in a Horween waxed flesh. I'm really excited to see how this one rolls and develops. It's a really nice leather, and I like the fact that this particular boot is a little shorter than many of my other boots. If I put this here, you might get a sense for that. A little shorter than the other boots there. I don't know if that's really visible, but it is the case. That's probably an 8-inch high boot. This is an 8.5. This is my shortest boot here from Brian the Bootmaker. So now that we've gone through those two brands, let's talk a little bit about Crush-On Retro. Crush-On Retro is a brand based out of China. They have a website that is really, really well developed, and they have a wide range of styles. Now, they've been around for a year or two at this point, and I think they've gotten somewhat of a bad rap on Reddit for offering cemented and other styles of shoes. But if you really focus on their boots, Crush-On Retro builds really high quality welted footwear. And now, granted, I'm not sure how many different factories they work with, but these are factory built Goodyear welted shoes and boots that they make. And their engineers are really, really good. And I will say that whereas some of the other Chinese and other makers have been accused of doing exact replicas of their other boots of other brands, I find that at least for their engineers, Crush-On Retro takes their own approach to stylistic cues for their boots. This is a very tall, almost like 10-inch tall boot. made from this really nice embossed cowhide leather. It's a 2.3 centimeter leather, so you can see it's already starting to form these rolls. And I think the thickness of that leather will help it form those rolls rather than crease like cowhide usually does. The embossing has been finished with a waxed flesh, so you can see that with friction, you get this higher shine. And I actually did a little pure polish shining, as I like to do, to accentuate the toe here. But Crush-On Retro, I was shocked because when I got this particular boot, the fit was incredible for my foot. I mean, I was like blown away that this fit was so good. And you might say, well, what are the compromises to this boot versus any of the others here? So whereas this boot has a unstructured toe and a leather heel counter, I believe this has a structured toe. This is probably Celastic with a leather heel counter back there. This boot has both Celastic on the toe and the heel counter. So that may be something that you wonder about. Celastic being a synthetic material, it doesn't mold as well. So if you're looking for a boot to mold to your foot, this one may not do that as readily as some of the other pairs. But what I found is that this pair, regardless of molding, when I put it on, it was really easy to get on. I didn't have to struggle to get it on. There was a more generous sizing to this opening here that allowed me to get the boot on easily. And stayed on, no heel slip at all. I put in a little arch support in there just to give myself a little bit more accommodation to the volume of this last, and everything fits incredibly. So Crush-On Retro, give them a real look. This priced out at about $340, I believe. This guy was around $500, if I'm not mistaken. That one was around $600. We're going to get to the three champions standard bearers here in a moment, but Crush-On Retro 601 Engineer in an embossed leather. That's a locally sourced leather from my understanding of things. High quality boot, a little bit more of a chonk last. You can see it's got this bigger, bulkier, round toe, but honestly, I like it. It reminds me a little of the Vibram 310 last in terms of how it feels and how it's shaped. So if you want a more casual boot, this is a great option for you. Crush-On Retro also has the 501 last, which is a little bit more reminiscent of this Lofgren last, from what I can tell, and a number of other lasts for their engineers. So you have choices there, and they're willing to customize a bit. For example, my next pair from them, which I ordered, actually has no, it's going to have an unstructured toe on their 501 last. So I'm going to see how that one plays out. But Crush-On Retro, really high quality. My latest acquisition after my first two acquisitions. Now we're going to go to another boot that I really think deserves attention. And this is the John Lofgren Wabash engineer boot. This is a Goodyear welted pair built in Japan. John Lofgren has a very haloed place in engineered boot lore as well as in service boot lore. He's been around for about 10 years, maybe a little longer, 15 years. And this particular last, which is, I believe, is 110 last, is very, very popular amongst heritage footwear enthusiasts. This is a boot that costs just over $1,000, around $1,100 or $1,200 at this point new. I was able to get this used. This is a natural Chrome XL leather, beautiful colored leather. I did a pure polish shine to this early on, and I've just brushed it out since then. Really high quality boot. This particular last has a flatter footbed, which makes it a little more uncomfortable for me. And I found my foot didn't accommodate this shape as well as I would like. There's a little bit of a pinch point here and here for me that I just felt like for my specific shape of foot, this was not as good of a fit as I was hoping, but there is a fantastic option. This is the one model of the group that has a storm welt that you can see here. The work done by John Lofgren's team in Japan is incredibly clean and high quality. And I think that there's a lot of design cues here that I really like. This more aggressive slope to the top of this is something I really like. They have a nice placement to this strap here. I will say that the Lofgren is harder to get on and off. So keep that in mind when you're trying to get your foot in. You might have to undo the strap. You may have to make a few changes to get your foot in. I actually had to do a little bit of stretching of the back heel counter. This was pretty hard for me once I was putting my foot in to try to round the corner, so to speak. And so I was able to do a little bit of stretching of that with the shoe tree, and then it seemed to work out just fine. There are people like Carl Morawski, another boot aficionado and engineer enthusiast, who gave up on his pair of engineers. I believe that was a Lofgren Devil's Causeway made from a Shinky horsehide, which has even less flexibility, has a more stiff temper. and just was impossible for him to get on and off. So he finally got rid of that. So now we're going to my two kings of boots in the engineer world. Number one is Brian the Bootmaker, the Roll Club engineer. Now, Roll Club is not without controversy. Many people feel like Brian the Bootmaker is an incredible bootmaker, myself included, but there are a few issues with his styles. They don't accommodate everybody. For example, they have this slightly more voluminous shaft that not everybody likes. I actually really like it. I find that it's easier to get my feet in and out of this boot. People have complained that Brian doesn't always do the best job with fitting, and there have been recent threads about him charging extra for personalized fittings outside of his office. So bottom line is you're going to want to make sure your costs are clear with Brian. He's a hardworking individual bootmaker. He does the whole thing from start to finish through his brand Roll Club out of Los Angeles. Unique, really sole work. These are hand-welted boots with a very unique shape. To me, this is the most shapely of my boots. I really like the design of the 1940 last. He also has a really cool 1945 last. I really like this kind of curve that forms the back of the shaft, which happens with age. And it just is a kind of a sexy boot and a lower boot than the other boots in my collection. This is a natural Italian horsehide leather with a fair bit of that patterning, reticulation, whatever you want to call that pattern. That is a natural part of the horse grain, and really, really nice boot. So I got this used, very happy with this pair. And to me, while this does have lower stitch density than some of the other boots, there's some really nice refined details. I would say that Brian seems to be one of the more polarizing figures, along with John Lofgren, in terms of the quality of his makeups and engineers. So just keep that in mind when you're exploring this space as to, what your actual desires are. And sometimes you have to try out the boots and figure out what your best fit is. The final is probably the most important engineer currently available on the market. Jake, Almost Vintage Style, speaks about this pair in haloed terms. One of the highest quality boots available. This is available through Standard and Strange. The great thing is they're available as ready to wear models, but they're not easy to come by because they tend to get sold out really quick. And this, my friends, is Clinch. Clinch makes a couple different lasts. This one is the CN wide last, which is a square-toed last. You can see it's got the squaring and it's unstructured toe. Fairly aggressive taper that Clinch introduced, at least that's my understanding of things. This is a rugged, robust Italian horsehide leather that will patina because as friction happens, some of the color of the top layer, the T-core layer, will start to wear out, and you will see the under surface color a little better. So a leather that T-core is basically is a leather where there's a top coat that will gradually, with friction, kind of wear down, revealing a lighter undersurface coat. And that is going to be a really appealing look to this. This is, I think, one of my favorite pairs. It fits really well. It's built to the highest of standards. Hand welted, hand lasted, hand stitched outsoles. The whole thing is done by hand. And you can really feel the quality of this boot. From my standpoint, the Clinch is the best engineer boot that I own. But honestly, from a terms of fit, I would argue that the Crush on Retro might actually fit me better. Go figure. Brian the Bootmaker, I actually bought a pair that was likely a half size too small, but with thinner dress socks, this boot works real well for me. So that's another thing you can factor in is if you use thinner socks, you may want to be a little bit more aggressive in your sizing of the boots. And if you wear thicker socks, you can have more flexibility at the top end. So really a big fan of this model with thinner socks, easy to get in and off. The Lofgren is going to go to a new home. I just sold it, but I wanted to do this video before I sold it. This is a beautiful stylistic shoe. I just think this is one of the most beautiful pairs I own. Although I'm not sure how I feel about the storm welt on it, the 270-degree storm welt. The Crush on Retro, I would say, is my biggest surprise and stands tall along with these other pairs because it has a stacked leather heel. Really nice detailing work done on that heel. It's got a Vibram V-bar sole, which is a higher end sole. This embossed cowhide leather, while a lower cost alternative has that wax on it that will slowly wear off over time. And you can already see it's forming some nice rolls just after a wear or two. Top-notch boot here. And Bristle Black also has a wide range of fans. Really another value standard, even though, these are all expensive boots. although I can make this argument that this guy at $330 is a great deal. You can go with local Indonesian leathers to drop the price of these boots, but still you're going to pay around $500. And this guy, there's going to be an upcharge of $100 to $200. So none of these boots are cheap. They're all amazing, but you should give them a try. So as I move forward, I'm going to be removing this pair, the Lofgren, and this pair, the Bristle Black, from my collection. That's going to simplify me down to this guy, and these four. So this will be my collection moving forward, though I am planning on placing an order with Unsung because they seem to be rapidly emerging as amongst one of the best bootmakers available. Certainly hand welted, hand lasted, and I just love the details that they're putting in their boots, like a 220-degree welt with a nailed waist and some really cool finishing details with a T-core style leather. So Unsung, another brand. And then I think the other brand that I think really deserves mentioning in this lineup is Creosote. Gabbard from Creosote has his Parlor Scar engineers in a wide range of leathers. He does a ton of work from repainting and putting overcoats on leathers to give them that T-core effect. He will strike through the leathers with different dyes. So he does a lot of leather dyeing work. He builds all the boots by hands himself. He crafts his own lasts. He does everything from start to finish on his own. But it takes 4 years to get his boots. So not always a realistic option unless you're willing to wait. But great guy, and I think Creosote may be the king of all engineers in my opinion. But if you're looking for something a little bit more readily available, you can find Clinch on the used market as I did. Just be careful about their sizing. Ask around the community, talk to different websites, and figure out what last you're getting and what sizing you should get on that last, because that's confusing. Brian the Bootmaker, if you can find a pair of his used, which you can occasionally do, I would definitely jump on that because great deal. But you can also pay around $2,000 new for this pair, close to that for this pair, and $300 or so bucks for this pair, and $700 or so bucks for this pair. So there's a wide range of price points from $300 to $700 to $2,000 and thereabouts. You'll see a couple editions over the next few months. Another one from Crush on Retro that I'm really looking forward to, including their 501 last that I'm going to have built on an unstructured toe. And as obviously Unsung, if I decide to spring for that pair, that'll be on my list as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of information about engineer boots, at least my perspective on engineer boots. I think that you should think about engineer boots and what height leather shaft you really want to get. I tend to like something between an 8-inch and an 11-inch shaft. Somewhere in this range is almost perfect for me, which is about a 9-inch. Some people like the shaft a little higher. I think having an unstructured toe is a real bonus. So this will allow you to fit a little bit more aggressively, although you can go with a structured toe like this and it'll maintain its shape just fine. The more leather componentry you can get, the better off you're going to be. Leather heel counters are going to mold to your foot. Though, as I mentioned, Crush on Retro with elastic heel counters and toe stiffeners are fitting me incredibly well so far. So you're not going to go wrong as long as you can sort out the market, buy and then sell the ones you don't want and move forward from there. So give engineers a try. If you're an heritage footwear enthusiast, they are now a standard in that community. These guys are going to stay popular because they have that rugged aesthetic, popular in the motorcycle community, popular amongst workwear community enthusiasts, popular amongst hipsters, and popular amongst idiots like me. So hope you're all doing well. We'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you at the next video.